will not talk too much like Gabi did, so we will enter directly into the subject. Who knows what is an ORM, which stands to Object Relation Mapping? So in the last several years, when working with ORMs, we can think about doctrine in particular, but what we are going to see tomorrow will apply to any ORM here, is that we are misusing them a lot. So we have those powerful ORMs that do all this dirty work of mapping between database and objects in memory, which offer us a very nice abstraction layer over the database. They are a lot customizable and misused. And this is what I want to talk about today, is how we are misusing ORMs, although they are very small details. I stolen this picture from Martin Fowler website, and this is the starting point I want to start from. If you see the rows here, on the left obviously are objects, and on the right we have tables. You notice that there is no table to entity mapping. We don't have an object that is necessarily coming from one table. So we can have two tables feeding the same object. We can have one object loading data from multiple tables. So this is the first picture. I wanted to say that the one entity, one table is not necessarily the correct way to do it. Let's continue. So we want to talk about those couple of, I would say, anti-patterns, or let's say mistakes that we make, which is mapping a bad column name to a bad property name. When I have a column that has a bad name, I don't necessarily map it to a bad property name. When a nullable column in the database level don't necessarily be nullable in my code. And mapping enum column types in general. By enum here, we don't necessarily mean a database enum, but any set of values that is valid for a column. Then multi-purpose columns to multi-purpose properties, which we should not do also. And the last one is related columns to related properties. So we will take them one by one to see one example from each situation. So imagine, before starting, I want to mention that here we are we will suppose that we are working with an existing database, so we constrain ourselves that we cannot touch the database. We are doing some integration. We have already other applications that are connecting to this database, so refactoring the database is not an option. We have to manage in the mapping level. So this is an example of an order table which has delivery and delivery 1. I'm sure nobody could guess what means delivery 1 here, because even if you guess it right, it could be anything. So here, when we look at the data, it becomes clear that one of them is delivery type, while the other one is delivery fee, also looking at more data. If we use the automated mapping generation from Doctrine, for instance, this is mapping using Doctrine, it will generate for us a very nice mapping like this. The problem with this mapping is that it will result in a code usage like the one below, which is not very clear to understand. So all we have to do here is to rename the column, which is very easy. As you see, you don't even notice the change on the mapping. So this is the first pattern. No matter how bad is the database you are working with, I know column names can be misleading, can be wrong, can be all sorts of scraps. So map them to better names, let's say, in your code. So this is the first example. Second one is when we have a nullable column on a database. Is in the same order table example, we have the delivery fee that is nullable, which is valid. That means for that system, either the delivery fee doesn't exist or it is 0. We don't know yet. The problem with this is that we are going to do casting whenever we need this field for computation. Later on, we might need some ifs, some logics in order to handle the nullability of this column. In this simple case, we could simply push this casting and the logic to the entity itself and then the calling code will become free. So I have a delivery fee, which is an integer. I don't care if it might be null or not in the database. Also, when setting, if I have an integer, I can set it as a delivery fee. Oops. Here it will be handled in the set delivery fee method. Good. So the next one, which gets a little bit more complicated, is when I have an enum. Here I have an enum of an order state, which can be new, confirmed, cancelled. This is not necessarily an enum. As I said, it could be a string, could be an integer, whenever I have a column with a specific set of properties. Again, the direct mapping of this will result in this kind of entity, which have get state and set state. Do you see a problem with this particular class as a PHP class? So I can set the state, I can get the state. Who can cancel an order? Which parts of the code? How can you find in the code from where you can cancel an order? Or how can you find in the code which parts are interested in new orders? You will look for constants, you will dig into the code, you will spend some time. Those are some examples that we cannot answer. However, with the same database, we could map this entity a little bit differently to make it more clear to read. So what we can do, we can confirm, cancel, ask is confirmed, ask is new, or is cancelled. We miss here the is new, but is the same. By doing this, we completely hide this state column from the rest of the code. All the rest of the code doesn't know that the order has a state column called state. All we know that it can be confirmed, is cancelled. Of course, this can be many other status. Now, if you use any IDU, a control click on is confirmed, I can see the exact list of parts of my code that is interested in a confirmed order. Okay, so we can call this, instead of getters and setters, we can have isers and actions. So is it that thing or actually become that thing, not set state? This is one of my favorite mistakes. Before, they used to squeeze things in the same column on the name of space. So they are saving space, and we end up with a column like this that is called delivery, which have the values store, courier, store online, courier online. It's clear that there are two columns mixed in this column, right? You can see it. So we have delivery type and payment type, which are in the same column. Other examples, let's move on. So after next step, looking at the data, we find out what means store and each value on this table. And we go next to the mapping. So although I have a single column, there is nothing stopping me from exposing this column as two concepts in my entity. So I have a method get delivery type. I have another method get payment type. Nobody knows that I am doing this hack and storing them in the same column. We can detail some of the methods. So this get delivery type, as you can see, it becomes pretty big. And the reason is that we have very bad, let's say, design in our database. But this being big shouldn't be a fear, because if you don't have it big in this location, you would have that block copied over tens or hundreds of places. The get payment type is very similar. So in the previous example, we took one column which was mixed and we split it in two mappings. There are cases when we are going to do the opposite. This database was designed 20 or 30 years ago, and looking for some performance considerations, they split the email address as username and domain. So they could query by domain, actually, that was the reason. But of course, when doing mapping for this table, I don't need to present those two columns independently. I can present them as a single concept called email. So my object has get email, set email. The mess behind that I am doing there, I don't need to show to anybody else. So I can contain it on the entity level. This was another example of when the databases imposed the limit on how much text you could put in a column. So for a product, the guys did description 1, description 2 in order to solve this problem. This was an interesting example because looking at the code, there were various types of concatenation. Every developer found a new way how to achieve this. Some guys use printf, some if. The last one is my favorite one, always. Yeah. Because, and that was tested and nobody found out because there are very rare products that went over the description 1 to description 2. Okay. Now, we are still in the related columns together, but this is a little bit different than the previous example, is that I cannot create a string or an int or anything out of those concepts which look related. So on an order table, I have delivery date, delivery address, and delivery status. The prefix delivery should tell me that this is like a hidden object inside a bigger object, which, as any decent developer would do, will extract it in a separate object. So in my database, I have a single table. Everything is in one table. But this doesn't stop me from mapping it as 2 classes in my code. There is a feature that will help us from Doctrine that is called embeddables, and we will see an example how we actually do this. So I have on top my order class, which has date, state ID, and I have a delivery, which is an embedded other class. So I have the delivery class, the order class. I have a composition relation here. An order has 1 delivery, and nobody needs to know that I'm storing this data in the same table. Now another example. Now on the order, I have cancel it, cancel date, and cancel reason. I tried to create another composition since the previous example worked pretty well, but here, even if we could create an object and we could call it cancellation or something like that, but it is not really something that is owned by the order. The order doesn't have a cancellation like it has delivery. This is also the second hint about this type of mapping, is those related columns will appear only for a subset of the data. Not all my orders will have this status. When we encounter this, we could also implement it with another feature from Doctrine, which is single table inheritance. It's supported by Doctrine. I have my order mapping however it is, with all the properties that it has, except the cancel date and the cancel reason, which I would extract them in another class, cancelled order, which extends from order. And Doctrine will do all the boilerplate work for me. The mapping, it will look at the discriminator column if it has cancelled that cancelled type Boolean. So when it is true, it is a cancelled order. Otherwise, it's just an order. But I don't care about this anymore. I only set up the mapping once, and I'm done. Thank you, everybody. Questions, comments, bad jokes? I think not. I think not.
In that case, it would be even better to use the name of the, like type order and cancel order.
Oh, yes. You can use any type, but to combine 2, I don't think it's possible. I'm not confirming. I'm not sure.
Any performance consideration we should be aware? I mean, what you showed us makes sense. It's really nice in terms of objects to work with.
Mm-hmm.
But for the embeddable object and for single table instances, for sure, there are some glitches.
This is a good example, actually. Yes. Yes, absolutely. So if you do something like this, let's take this example. If you are somewhere far in the code. You are not looking at the entity. You are working on something else. You might, for example, query the database for all deliveries, while you don't know that you are actually querying the orders table. And is a big difference if you are querying a table that is involving a lot of looking, because we have a lot of updates and inserts happening on the same table, while you think, oh, I'm just querying the delivery table. So this is one of the performance gotcha that you need to be aware of. You might be querying from the object name, you think you are querying something, while you are actually querying another thing. With the single table inheritance also is the same. You might think you are querying a table while you are querying 3 or 4 tables, because we have also the multiple table inheritance. I can have my order split in 5 or 6 tables with inheritance, and if you don't have proper where clauses, you will be querying all the tables when querying for a small subset of orders. So yeah, you should be aware of any performance glitches with such an approach.
You can also do this as a trait. You should have multiple entities
that use the same, yes. That's actually very typical with types like money, which all of it has value and currency, for example.
And timestamp created as
yes.
Can you tell us more about how you have used this in the previous project that you have worked for?
I will tell it in a sad way. I suffered more from not using this than I benefited from using it, actually. So I learned the hard way, the other way around. As I said, when starting, this was about the things that slowed us down a lot, and we wanted to find better solutions how to do it. So how it helps is only one thing. You have faster development and less bugs.
Okay, I understand that, but I was wondering if you can give us some practical examples of how to do it. I mean, okay, I understand that you can couple it with order and canceled orders, but any other examples?
There are plenty of examples. Actually, I can tell you better the approach than the examples. The best approach I found is completely forget about the database when you are making entities. Really forget about the database. Forget that you are going to a database. Leave it as the last thing. If you have a 2 weeks story or task or whatever, the last day is the database work, whatever. Make your design correct. Okay, what this object needs to talk with who? Does this need delivery or not? Does this need address? Does this need billing, payment information? Design your relations correctly and leave the database really at the last stage. Sometimes you find out that you don't need a database at all.
I have one more question regarding the latest version of Symfony. As you probably are aware that in Symfony 4, the doctrine generate command is no longer working, and the doctrine maintainers are planning to also remove it from the upcoming stable release of
Perfect.
of doctrine and related bundles. How would you advise someone who's starting nowadays with Symfony 4 to organize their workflow in terms of an application? Let's say you have to do a very simple application that saves to the database a list of orders and their order items.
Okay.
That's it. No card, no.
Yes.
How would you advise them to approach this from the point of view of tonight's talk and what I have said earlier, that in the upcoming versions of Symfony doctrine, the generator bundle will be much more limited than it was until now?
Okay, first thing, when you say limited or small application, I will assume a simple CRUD application.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Perfect.
If you have a simple CRUD application, don't listen to me. This guy is crazy. He's saying bullshit stuff. Don't listen to me. But is anyone here working on a CRUD application?
Yeah, we're making lots of APIs connected by Angular.
So this situation even if when you think it is a crude application, from my experience, after a few years, it grows up to be a huge monster. So yes, they start as crude applications, but they end up as big applications. Second, about the doctrine generation. First of all, it is a very, very small tool. I remember I used it once. I generated like 20 tables in no time. Maybe I saved 1 or 2 days, let's say, of work. I'm very slow when typing. But when I compare this to 4 or 5 years of the project life, this is nothing. This gaining 1 or 2 days compared to a project of years and is still online. I don't know when that project will be taken up. You basically, what you want, a sprint of 1 or 2 days, that's not a big deal. And also, I really like what they did. I didn't know about it. They're encouraging you to do what I said previously. Don't start from the database. Start from your code. Then, okay, the other feature doctrine schema update is good. You have your entities mapped, everything. Then he will create a database for you. That's okay. But that's what I wanted to say. They're ORM, not ROM. So object relation mapping. You have some objects and you do the mapping, not the other way around. Does this answer your question?
Yeah.
When processing batches of objects, what would be a suggestion to the memory issues that might occur with the doctrine and ORM?
Yeah, to be honest, the talk was supposed to have 3 parts, and when I look at the number of slides, I said, okay, let's. So actually, there are 3 parts. One, which is regarding columns, mapping about columns in general, and there are 2 more issues that we didn't talk about today. The second one is the relations and joins, so the relations between tables and the impact of them as relations with the entities, and the third one is querying the database. So how query builder, DQL, querying the database, which also has part of it, which is the batch processing. Doctrine has some, I would say, has some not bad support for batch processing. And if you are in a small batches, like in a couple of thousands or tens of thousands, usually it works fluently. If we are talking about millions and this kind of data, you have to do it custom. Doctrine will not help you much. It will only kill your machines with memory consumption. I don't know, really the maximum I could work fluently, 5,000-10,000 entities could go pretty okay. But after that, no way. You have to do your custom. Either you have a custom DQL if you are updating a lot of stuff to actually run a query. If you cannot do that, then the other solution is asynchronous processing. So I go to the database, I bring 1 million records. I have offline workers as through a message queue or something like that. Okay, I have this 1 million. I put it in this queue, and I can then have 100, 1,000, 10,000 workers doing the thing in parallel. But this is really depends. Sometimes your work is not parallelizable.
Yeah.
So this is per situation.
So each worker is actually work only for one entity.
Yes, so I don't see this as a general rule. Each situation to be solved independently.
There is also the middle way, just in the documentation, like fetching your data in smaller batches, like with the objects, have reasons or whatever.
Yes.
Hundreds of thousands, and do stuff with them, and then clear the entity manager.
Yes.
And then start again with the next
That's
batches.
the limited support.
Queues and having a queue server and work.
Yes, yes.
And getting out of memory because you try to pull, I don't know, 100,000 objects in memory and do stuff with them.
Of course, when you do this, you have to be careful because if you have an object loaded to memory, which process, and you clear them, it will crash. The next.
You have to flash first.
Yeah. You have to flash and you have to reload the next batch from scratch. You can load them or you iterate them and then iterate them at the end of the iteration you clear because it's clear.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and
you actually load them in a while, like you load them one by one.
Yeah.
You have to be a little more careful with such an approach because there were many things that when got mixed they didn't have very nice and unexpected results. For example, I remember when the same application was also using second level cache. And yeah, things get a little bit mixed. Some workers had to clear their cache before, some had to actually bypass and query directly without cache, and gets a little bit tricky there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's take a break. The beta is not yet here, but we can use the time to discuss together.
I will stop this.